So China's got everyone talking again.
Mm.
This time, it's about a potential 10 trillion yuan stimulus package.
Right.
It's all over the news.
Yeah, it's huge.
Makes you wonder, though, can they really just throw money at the problem?
Well, that's what we're going to try to figure out today, right?
Yeah, dive into this whole thing.
That's tricky.
See if it's a real fix or just a temporary Band-Aid.
Yeah, because the thing is, China's dealing with a lot more than just, like, a little slowdown.
Yeah.
They've got these immediate issues, like the real estate market being all shaky.
Mm-hmm.
But then underneath all of that, they've got deeper problems, these structural things.
Almost like they're trying to fix a leaky roof
Yeah.
while the whole foundation's crumbling, right?
Exactly, you got it.
So what's, like, the biggest of those structural issues?
Well, you could argue it's that they don't have enough domestic consumption. China's growth, for years, it's been all about exports and investments.
Right.
But that can't go on forever.
So they need their own people to start spending more.
Exactly, yeah, for the long term.
Which makes this whole stimulus thing even more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What are they actually planning to do with all that money?
Okay, so the Reuters report, it breaks it down.
Okay.
They're looking at two main areas.
Okay.
A big chunk, like 6 trillion yuan, is going towards local debt relief.
6 trillion. Over what, like a year?
No, 3 years.
Okay, so spread out a bit.
Yeah, but still, 2 trillion a year, that's a lot.
It sounds like a lot.
Right, but then you think about it.
Yeah.
Local government debt is estimated to be, around 40 trillion?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So some analysts are saying they might need, closer to 5 trillion a year to really tackle it.
So maybe not as impressive as it sounds at first.
Right, yeah.
And what about the other 4 trillion? What's that for?
That's aimed at the real estate market, trying to prop it up.
Okay.
Over 5 years, they're going to be buying up land, existing properties, that sort of thing.
So basically, the government's going to be the buyer.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting strategy.
But again, will it work? Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, the market's been losing a ton of money, right?
Yeah, like 2 trillion a year since 2022, they're estimating.
Wow.
So 800 billion a year from the government, it helps, but...
Might not be enough.
Right.
And then there's all this talk about more money for consumer stimulus in banks.
Yeah, there's another 2 trillion floating around for that.
So trillion each.
Supposedly, but the details are super vague.
It's interesting, though, that there's nothing in there about direct support for families.
You're right, no family subsidies or anything like that.
Which seems like a missed opportunity, doesn't it? I mean, if you want people to spend more.
It seems like putting money directly in their pockets would make sense.
Right.
But the government seems pretty set on this top-down approach.
So big investments, but not really helping ordinary people directly.
Yeah, and you got to imagine that's causing some frustration.
Oh, absolutely.
People are feeling the slowdown.
Right, and it's like the government's not really listening.
Exactly. There's definitely that sense of disconnect.
It's wild how this is all happening while things with the U.S. are so tense.
Oh, yeah, that adds another layer to it.
We've got the election coming up. Biden's already put some restrictions on tech investment.
Right.
And then there's the whole trade war thing if Trump wins.
It's a lot of uncertainty, yeah.
So how does all that play into the stimulus plan?
Well, imagine Trump gets back in.
Okay.
And he starts slapping on more tariffs, more sanctions.
Yeah.
China's going to feel the pressure to, fight back, right?
Yeah.
So they might issue even more bonds, just pump more money into the economy.
Like a financial arms race.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that, mess with the value of the yuan?
It could, yeah.
And wouldn't that make things even worse?
Potentially.
How so?
Well, first off, it could spook investors.
You make them lose confidence.
Exactly, both in China and globally.
And then it becomes harder for China to borrow money.
Exactly.
Plus, the U.S. would probably flip out, right?
Oh, yeah. They've been accusing China of currency manipulation for years.
Right.
So this would just add fuel to the fire.
So we've got this massive stimulus package, but it's not clear if it'll fix the real problems.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, it could cause a whole bunch of new problems.
Yeah, and then you throw in the U.S. election.
Oh, yeah, that's a wild card.
Well,
What else that'll happen there?
That's a lot to unpack.
It really is.
So let's try to make sense of it.
Okay.
Let's start with how the market's reacting to this whole 10 trillion yuan thing.
Got it.
Because from what I've seen, it hasn't been all that positive.
Yeah, pretty muted response so far.
Do you think investors are just, not convinced?
Could be that, yeah.
They don't see it as a real solution?
Right, or maybe they're worried about all those risks we talked about.
The currency devaluation, credit downgrade, all that.
Yeah, all of it.
Or maybe Beijing's playing it strategically.
What do you mean?
Maybe they're holding back some of the big stuff
Yeah.
for a bigger reveal later, during the party congress next month. That's definitely possible.
Would be quite the move.
For sure.
But either way, the big question remains.
Yeah.
Can you really just spend your way out of deep economic problems?
That's the million-dollar question.
And to answer that, we need to look at the bigger picture.
The long-term outlook.
Exactly.
And that's where things get really interesting.
I'm all ears.
Okay, so let's dive into that.
All right.
First, we got to talk about what the central bank's been up to.
Oh, all right. Lay it on me.
They've been quietly making some big moves.
Like what?
They've been relaxing asset requirements for banks.
So basically, changing the rules about what banks can hold.
Yeah, exactly.
Giving them more wiggle room.
More flexibility in the short term.
Okay, but that sounds kind of risky, right?
Well, it means banks can hold on to riskier assets, lower quality stuff.
So it could backfire?
Potentially.
Yeah.
What would that look like?
Well, it could hurt the overall health of their financial system. And in a worst-case scenario...
It could lead to a downgrade of their credit rating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, not good.
So what would that even mean, a credit rating downgrade?
So basically, a credit rating tells you how likely a country is to repay its debts.
Okay.
A downgrade means lenders see them as riskier.
Gotcha.
So it becomes more expensive for them to borrow money.
Oh, I see.
And investors might get spooked and pull their money out.
So it's like a domino effect.
Exactly.
The worse things look,
Yeah.
the harder it is to get people to invest.
Right, and that just makes the problems worse.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is.
But I mean, it can't all be doom and gloom, right?
It's true. There are some potential upsides here.
Okay, I'm listening. Give me some good news.
Even with all these challenges,
Yeah.
China still has a lot going for it.
Like what?
Well, they've got a huge workforce,
Mhm.
and it's getting more and more educated. They've got a growing middle class.
Right.
And their government, they've been pretty good at managing the economy in the past.
So there's still potential there, even with the slowdown.
Absolutely. Tons of potential.
Yeah.
Some economists even think the slowdown could be a good thing.
Really?
It could force them to deal with those structural issues.
The ones we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Like finally stop relying so much on exports and get their own people to spend more.
Exactly. Become more balanced.
Interesting.
It'd be painful for sure, but
necessary.
right, like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly.
I like that analogy.
Right?
But there's no guarantee it'll work out that way.
Oh,
right?
not at all.
This is complicated stuff.
It is.
Lots of resistance to change, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So it's a gamble with high stakes.
Definitely high stakes.
And the outcome affects everyone, not just China.
Exactly. This isn't just some far-off thing.
Right.
It has real consequences for all of us.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, totally.
What happens in China affects us all.
It does.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together, for better or worse.
And that's why it's so important to understand what's going on.
Exactly. That's what we're trying to do today.
Right.
With this deep dive into China's economy.
Yeah, unpack all of this.
We've looked at their stimulus plans, the debate about these deeper reforms,
Yeah.
and what it all means for the rest of the world.
It's a lot.
It is, but hopefully this gives everyone a better grasp of what's going on.
Hopefully, yeah, provide some context.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
we'll leave you with this thought.
All right.
Keep your eyes on China
Because what they do matters.
at the time.
Their decisions will have ripple effects all over the world.
So stay tuned for the next part of our deep dive
Where we'll dig even deeper into all of this.
and explore what it all means for you.
And for the global economy.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind here.
Yeah.
China's central bank, they've already been taking some, pretty drastic steps.
Really? To like try and stabilize things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
like what have they been doing?
Well, one thing they've been doing is they've been quietly relaxing asset requirements for banks.
So like loosening the rules on what assets banks can hold on to,
Exactly.
giving them more leeway.
More flexibility, yeah, in the short term at least.
Okay, but that sounds a little bit risky, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it means banks can hold assets that are, considered riskier, lower quality,
So it could like backfire on them?
potentially.
How so? What could happen?
Well, for one thing, it raises concerns about the overall health of China's financial system.
Right, makes sense.
And then if it keeps going, it could even lead to a downgrade in their credit rating.
A credit rating downgrade? Wow, okay. What would that mean for China? I mean, and for like the global economy.
So a credit rating, it's basically a measure of a country's ability to, repay its debts.
Yeah.
A downgrade means that lenders see a higher risk of default,
Go.
which would make it way more expensive for China to borrow money,
Right.
and investors might get spooked and pull out.
So it's kind of a snowball effect, right?
Exactly, yeah. The worse their economic outlook,
Yeah.
the harder it becomes to attract investment.
And then the economy slows down even more.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
Thanks.
But, got to stay optimistic, right? It's not all doom and gloom.
Okay, I'll bite. What's the optimistic take here?
Well, even with all these challenges,
Mhm.
China still has a lot of economic firepower.
Oh,
They've
yeah.
got a massive workforce, increasingly educated, a
Yeah.
growing middle class,
Mhm.
and their government, they've generally been pretty effective at like steering the economy.
So you're saying even though growth is slowing down,
Yeah.
there's still potential there.
Huge potential, yeah.
Interesting.
And some economists are actually arguing that the slowdown
Yeah.
could be a blessing in disguise.
Really? How so?
Well, it could force China to finally confront those structural issues we've been talking about.
Like finally start weaning themselves off exports,
Exactly.
boost domestic consumption,
Right, yeah.
make the economy more sustainable.
Yeah, more balanced for the long term.
So it's like a painful but necessary adjustment period.
Yeah, exactly. Like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly.
Haha, I like that.
Right.
But there's no guarantee that it'll actually like play out that way, right?
No, of course not. I mean, these are complex issues.
Deeply entrenched interests and all that.
Exactly. And there's going to be a lot of resistance to change.
So it's a high-stakes gamble.
Definitely high stakes.
And what happens, it affects everyone, not just China.
Right. It's not just some, abstract economic drama playing out somewhere else.
Yeah.
It has very real consequences for all of us.
So how does this all, like, play out in the real world? For the average person, I mean.
Well, one of the most immediate impacts would be on global supply chains. I mean, China's a manufacturing powerhouse.
Yeah.
So any slowdown in their economy,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to ripple through the whole world.
So we could see, like, prices going up for stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Delays in shipments, that
So-
kind of thing.
And it could also affect financial markets, too.
Oh, right. How so?
Well, if investors start losing confidence in China,
Mm-hmm.
that could lead to, a flight of capital, a decline in global stock prices.
So that could affect, like, my retirement savings,
Potentially.
my mortgage rates, even, like, groceries.
Exactly. Yeah, it can have a pretty wide-reaching impact.
And what about, like, political instability in China? Could that become a problem for the rest of the world?
That's definitely a concern, yeah.
I mean, if people are struggling economically,
Right.
that can lead to unrest.
Exactly. And the Chinese government, they know that
So they're walking a tightrope here.
they are, yeah, trying to stimulate the economy
Mm-hmm.
without triggering inflation or, widespread discontent.
Sounds like a tough balancing act. It is, yeah.
So do you think they can pull it off?
I mean, if I knew that for sure, I'd be a very rich man.
Uh-huh. Fair enough.
It's really too early to say,
There's so many factors at play.
Exactly. And the situation's always changing.
But if you had to guess, based on, your expertise,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think is the most likely outcome?
Well, China, they have this long history of resilience,
Okay.
adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
They've been through economic storms before.
Yeah,
I think they'll find a way to muddle through this one, too.
but probably not without some bumps along the way, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely not without bumps. And those bumps, they could be pretty significant.
But everyone, not just China.
Exactly.
So let's try to connect this back to, everyday life.
Okay.
How could China's economic slowdown actually affect someone like living in the US, Europe, wherever?
Well, like we talked about earlier, you might start seeing higher prices for, stuff that's made in China. Electronics, clothes, toys, all of that. So maybe it'll make more sense to buy local.
Yeah, exactly. And not just for, ethical reasons.
Right, but for economic ones, too.
Exactly.
And it's probably a good idea to start thinking about, like, diversifying investments.
Yeah, for sure. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you've got a mix of assets.
Right, some that aren't so tied to China.
Exactly.
So basically, be prepared for some turbulence.
Yeah,
And take steps to, protect yourself,
that's always good advice, yeah.
especially when things are so uncertain.
Exactly.
You mentioned earlier that this slowdown could force China to make some much-needed reforms.
Mm-hmm.
What would those reforms look like? Like, what would a reformed Chinese economy actually look like?
Well, it would be an economy that's less reliant on exports
Okay.
and more focused on meeting the needs of its own people.
So less about making stuff for the rest of the world,
Yeah.
more about boosting their own domestic consumption.
Exactly.
And it would be more equitable, right?
Right. Yeah. With a stronger social safety net, more opportunities for people to, improve their lives.
And less dominated by like those state-owned enterprises.
Yeah, definitely.
More space for private businesses to grow,
More dynamic, more competitive.
which would ultimately be good for everyone, right?
Exactly. Good for China, good for the
It
world.
sounds like a pretty radical transformation.
It would be, yeah.
So how likely is it that we'll actually see these kinds of reforms?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to be easy.
Lots of pushback, I imagine.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Lots of vested interests, both in the government and, in the business world.
So what are the key factors here? Like, what's going to determine whether or not these reforms actually succeed?
Well, first and foremost, political will.
Okay.
The Chinese leadership, they need to be fully committed to this.
Even if it means like short-term pain, political backlash, all that.
Exactly. Yeah, they need to be willing to, weather the storm.
And what about the Chinese people themselves? What role do they play in this?
That's crucial too, yeah.
They need to be on board with these changes.
Exactly. There needs to be public support. People need to be willing to, make some sacrifices.
Embrace this new economic model.
Right.
So it can't just be a top-down thing.
No.
It needs to be bottom-up as well.
Exactly. Everyone working together.
And what about the rest of the world? Like, can countries like the U.S. help or hurt this process?
Oh, yeah. The international community can definitely play a role.
Like how so?
Well, they can encourage China to move in the right direction
Okay.
through trade agreements, investment deals, things like that.
So like offering carrots instead of just sticks.
Exactly. Yeah.
What else?
Well, sharing best practices, providing technical assistance.
Right. China doesn't have to figure this all out on their own.
Exactly. They can learn from other countries that have, made similar transitions.
So there are a lot of moving pieces here.
A lot of moving pieces, yeah.
Right. Both within China and internationally.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's going to be, it's going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we've covered a lot today.
We have.
China's stimulus plan, the debate about reforms, the
Yeah.
global impact, all of it.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is. But before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to like that core tension we keep coming back to.
The tension between short-term fixes and long-term solutions.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you were advising the Chinese government right now,
Okay.
what would you tell them to prioritize?
Oof. That's a tough one,
Yeah.
It's tempting to go for the quick fix.
Just pump more money in.
Yeah, exactly. Hope for the best.
But, in the long run,
Yeah.
that's not going to solve the problem.
So they need to focus on those deeper structural issues.
They do, yeah, if they want to, achieve real prosperity.
Shift away from exports, boost domestic consumption, empower the private sector.
Exactly.
But those are big changes.
They are, yeah. Could take years to implement.
Years, maybe even decades.
So it's a balancing act, right?
Yeah.
They need to keep things afloat in the short term while also building towards a more sustainable future.
Exactly. A very difficult needle to thread.
And the stakes are high.
Incredibly high, yeah.
Not just for China, but for the entire world.
Exactly.
Yeah, it really shows you just how connected everything is.
It does, yeah.
We're all in this together, whether we like it or not.
For better or worse, that's the global economy for you.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand what's happening,
Absolutely.
to try and make sense of it all. So that's what we've tried to do today with this deep dive into China's economy.
Lots to unpack.
We've explored their stimulus plans, talked about the need for reforms.
The global impact, all of that.
And I think we've raised some pretty important questions.
Definitely.
Questions that, we don't really have the answers to yet.
Not yet, no.
Can China really pull this off? Will they choose the quick fix or go for the long-term solution?
And how will it affect the rest of us?
Big questions.
Yeah.
Big questions.
But hopefully, this deep dive has given everyone a better understanding of the situation.
Some food for thought, at least.
Exactly. A framework for thinking about all of this.
Because knowledge is power, right? Especially in a world that's changing so fast.
Couldn't agree more.
The more we understand about these global trends, the better prepared we'll be for whatever comes next.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we'll leave you with this.
Right.
Keep your eyes on China. What happens there matters.
It matters a lot, yeah.
Their decisions will impact all of us, one way or another.
Stay curious, keep learning, and, don't be afraid to ask questions.
That's great advice.
Yeah, that's how we make sense of the world.
That's it for today.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
See you next time.